And the commander of the Guard of Honour will slope arms. And he will go and invite the President of the United States to inspect the Guard of Honour.
Shoulder! Arms!
He will say, Mr. President, the Guard of Honour of the Grenadier Guards, Coldstream Guards and Scots Guards is present and ready for your inspection.
Mr. President, the Guard of Honour of the Grenadier Guards, the Coldstream Guards and the Scots Guards are present and awaiting your inspection.
And with a salute, the commander will now take position and lead the President to inspect the Guard of Honour. It's a chance for the President to look straight into the eyes of the soldiers of the three regiments who represent today all the armed forces and who also represent one of the principal allied nations to the United States. Regiments that for generations have served side by side with the United States Armed Forces on both battles and peacekeeping operations.
Power Oil Light. Light enough for movement.
Commander encouraging the President to now pay his respects to these soldiers. And the King encouraging him to proceed along the line past the state standards that the King gives his respects to. And the music chosen very suitably, the great Trumpet Voluntary by Clark, which in its way enhances this event. And the rear rank, chance for, again, the President to look at the Coldstream Guards, who always form the left of the line, or the right as he was looking at it, and then the Scots Guards in the middle, and then finally the Grenadiers towards our camera. And you can tell the different regiments by their plumes and by the buttons. And closest to us, the Grenadiers have buttons equally spaced and a grenade at the collar and a white plume on the left-hand side. The Scots Guards buttons in threes in the middle, so no plume on either side. And the Coldstream Guards have their plume on the right-hand side, and it's red, and their buttons are in twos. The commander takes leave of the President with a salute by the sword. And the President expressing his gratitude. The King pointing out others who have been playing their part, and then returning to the dais where the Queen and the First Lady are waiting. The King and the President will now witness the march past of the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery with the guns that they use to fire the gun salute, followed by a rank past of the 4 divisions of the Sovereign's escort that brought the carriage procession here, and finally a march past of this 3-regiment strong Guard of Honour. And the music for this will be the Royal Artillery's Slow March. And a present arms from the Guard of Honour to the sovereign standards and to the guns that will march past now in front of the King and the President. Guns that were used in battles like the First World War, 13-pounders that fired the gun salute today, and not only fired salutes for major occasions like this, but also have from time to time carried the coffins of members of the royal family at their funerals. We must always remember that for the President, he's not just looking at this parade from there. He sees in the background the massive round tower of Windsor Castle set on its mound, and from which is fluttering the State Royal Standard, 36 feet long, blowing in today's rather rigorous wind here. The sound of the guns and their limbers, and President, I think, in this very confined and extraordinarily beautiful quadrangle. The music now changes to the Lifeguards' Slow March. As the rank past begins of the Household Cavalry, the 4 divisions, and the trumpeter there on his charger, just holding it all together. The Lifeguards with their red tunics and white plumes. And then the Blues and Royals Slow March will be played as the Blues and Royals give their salute to the President. And the Household Cavalry will be feeding out of the quadrangle down towards Frogmore again through the George IV gate. And at the back there, the axes carried by the soldiers. The soldier could draw a fresh horse for battle. And now the Guard of Honour, the 3-regiment strong Guard of Honour, brought to attention and prepared for their march off. They'll form 3 ranks.
Guard of Honour will move to the left in 3. 4 3s! Left!
And the state colours. The Scots Guard state colour was presented to the regiment by Queen Victoria quite near here in 1899. And the one carried by the Coldstream Guards was presented to them by King William IV some decades before. And as they march past and turn in order to give their last eyes left to the President, once again, as the music plays, let's remember the strong tradition of fighting side by side, the armed forces of the United Kingdom with the United States of America. And those traditions are as much a part of the pageantry here, to be marked and acknowledged by two heads of state at the conclusion of this welcoming ceremony. The state colour of the Scots Guards passing by the King and the President, and the music when the Guards are on parade. Then for the massed bands of the Grenadier Guards, the Coldstream Guards and the Scots Guards, they too now manoeuvre to leave through the George IV gateway. And shortly they're going to carry on their music with the Stars and Stripes Forever, the bond of friendship, underscoring what's going on here. The Liberty Bell and Semper Fidelis. And the pipes. And with Scotland the Brave and Hielan Laddie, what better to conclude this musical welcome to the King and the President? The President who has so many associations through his mother with Scotland, and it is to Scotland that he often visits and his involvements there. The King will now escort the President through the Sovereign's entrance and then up the Sovereign's staircase and into the private part of Windsor Castle, where he'll be taken to his rooms by the Queen. They'll be shown where they'll be staying, and then the family can all sort themselves out, and very shortly followed there by Colonel Ed Launders, who's put this event together, and the two royal equerries, and also with a bodyguard turnout there from the Honourable Corps of Gentlemen at Arms with their swan-feathered helmets. And for this part of the state visit, the arrival of the President here as a guest of the King and Queen, this ceremonial is now over, and the preparations for a delicious lunch, undoubtedly, with members of the royal family will begin. And for these soldiers, sailors, airmen and women, a chance to get back to their duties.
So the second state visit for US President Donald Trump is officially underway. Alistair Bruce taking us through proceedings there. As he said, the President and the King now inside Windsor Castle, along with other senior royals and the First Lady. A chance to settle in after that ceremonial start to proceedings. And Alistair, to the untrained eye, that all seemed to go rather well.
It did, and I'll just point out that we're just seeing the Major General commanding the Household Division there, and our good friend Colonel Guy Stone, who is the brother of Mark Stone, who has been with you quite a lot today in our coverage of this state visit. I think it's a perfect start for the intentions here, which is to make sure that the ground is set for significantly powerful people in both the United Kingdom government and the United States government and executive to play their part in moving forward with the discussion of diplomacy. But there could be no more private, more spectacular, more historic a location for the President to have been brought to by carriage in ceremony than here at Windsor. And it's up above there in those rooms above this gate that at the moment the King and Queen will be showing the President and First Lady where their rooms are going to be as the reign of Charles III continues. And Windsor Castle is such a spectacular place. It's on the right-hand side of the quadrangle there, St George's Hall, where the state banquet will take place later. And there is the view that was behind all those troops. And what could have been more impactful for the President than that piece of history?
Alistair, for the moment, thank you. Well, our US correspondent Mark Stone is here with me in Windsor alongside our International Affairs editor Dominic Waghorn. A little mention for the Stone family there from Alistair Bruce, your brother taking part in proceedings today. Yeah. Dominic, I'll come to you first, if I may. That was a real display of ceremonial might from the UK, something that only the UK can offer. And obviously all eyes in the UK and the United States on this visit, but globally as well, a lot of attention on it.
Yeah, no one does it better, and you're always reminded of that every time you watch the British military in action with British royalty and the British state, and the full might of all of that combined is hugely impressive, isn't it? And of course the challenge for the government and for the palace in pulling this off was that they are hosting a man who likes superlatives. Now he's got one unprecedented fact, which is he is the first elected leader to be invited twice to have this kind of state visit. But also, you know, the challenge for the palace and for 10 Downing Street was that this had to be slightly sort of truncated, both in terms of days, but also geographically. So what he didn't get was and he won't get, is a sort of a stagecoach parade through London. Now that's not least because he won't like the process that could lead to. We've not seen many protests here, but cast your mind back to 2019, his first state visit. Hundreds of thousands of people out on the streets. That would have really cast a shadow over. So for various reasons, they've made this state visit happen cloistered, in a cloistered sense. So Windsor Castle, but also in Chequers and Winfield House last night. And that's meant that it's smaller. And so to compensate for that, they've laid on 3 regiments. So we've never seen that amount of military ceremony for any state visit, and that's something he can now fly home with proudly to say that he was the second, well, the only elected leader to get a second state visit, but also he was seeing and lavished with an unprecedented amount of pomp and circumstance and ceremony here.
My work is easy because I use ClickUp. Here's how I keep track of all my tasks. I start by brain dumping everything I need to get done in a list view. Next, I set a priority and a due date to keep things on track. I create custom statuses to organize my progress exactly how I want. I like to add the action items field so AI can show me.
The organisers will think this is actually a much better location, clearly better for security because they can contain it in a way that they can't central London, protesters, as Dom was saying, but also because it's a castle, right? You know, Trump will love every moment of this, the optics, all of it. You know, this is all beamed back live across America on every news channel, the front page, every paper tomorrow. The Britain fawning over Donald Trump. He will enjoy that a huge amount. But as you say, behind all of that, there is purpose, pomp, but purpose with it as well. This is, on the face of it, a state visit, of course, but there's a reason behind it. It is about the politics, it's about the geopolitics, it's about trade, and that's what we're going to see tomorrow and tonight, because at the state dinner tonight, the so-called tech bros, there will be people like Sam Altman will be among them. Not Elon Musk, incidentally. He's not here for obvious reasons. But so it's about trade, and for what the British government and what officials have told me, to push back against those who say, what on earth is this all about? He's such a disruptive president. He's disrupted Europe. He's appearing to abandon Ukraine, all the rest of it, that his domestic agenda is clearly a real concern for some people. So why are you doing it, so say some? Well, the answer, I think, is because they have accepted in this second Trump term that he is, for now at least, he's all-powerful. If you're not in, you're out. And Britain has this to be able to show off to the US president. They know he loves it. They're appealing to what he likes. And they hope, the government hopes, that it will pay off. And I think we'll see the beginning of that tomorrow with deals that will be signed. There will be a signing ceremony of a tech deal before the jeopardy of the news conference that will follow.
Yeah, we will be hearing from the President later today, of course. He's due to give a speech at the state banquet tonight. The King as well making a speech, such as the protocol for these state visits. And while we wait to hear the words, let's talk about body language in terms of what you both made of it. There was a moment there where the President was inspecting the Guard of Honour and had to have a gentle chivvy along from the King, who put the hand on the small of the President's back to sort of move him along the line. As Dominic was saying, you know, there's a lot crammed into a small window here for this state visit, but perhaps a sign that the President was sort of overawed by the occasion. The inspecting of the Guard didn't quite know what to do, the protocol. And, you know, as we've both all reflected today, the President loves this, and I just wonder, Dominic, if the sense of occasion got to him slightly.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think, you know, we're used to seeing this man who has a commanding presence wherever he is. You know, he is the alpha male in whatever room or arena or whatever sort of forum he's at, and he's normally sort of very much sort of confident about his physical presence, isn't he?
He's the king in the room usually.
Absolutely, and he runs his court like a kind of medieval king. But you know, ironically, actually in a castle, in this kind of environment, he's slightly at a loss, isn't it? It's not comfortable territory. It's not his comfort zone, is it? And so he's not quite sure where he should be putting himself. I mean, who would be? And unless you're a king or a soldier who's trained for this, it's a fairly, you know, strange environment to be in. Something he's absolutely loving, but I think, you know, he wasn't entirely sure where to go. But we didn't have a repeat of the faux pas that we had with the Queen, did we? Where he was literally all over the place and had to be sort of guided back into position. But you know, I think, despite feeling probably slightly apprehensive about where he should be putting himself, he's clearly loving this. In other sort of observations, he seems to have a new suit, doesn't he? He's sort of looks like he's found a new tailor. It's a slightly better fitting suit.
I hadn't spotted that. I was looking at the First Lady's outfit.
What do you think, Mark? that suit looks a little bit sort of closer sort of fitting than what we've seen before.
Yeah, I think it did. I wouldn't be at all surprised that for this moment he wanted a new suit, you know? We saw his suit.
I mean, this is not the area I was expecting you two to discuss,
well,
but I welcome it.
SJ.
I welcome it.
We know our
fashion 5 minutes.
We saw all his suits being taken off Air Force One yesterday at Stansted. You know, like another observation, but just the extraordinary nature of the American president travelling. It's mad, isn't it? You know, the Air Force One.
This is the greeting from the Prince and Princess of Wales.
These helicopters literally get put in the back of transport planes and flown around the world to wherever the president goes. The Beast, I don't know if the Beast, his vehicle is here this time, because he's flying everywhere, even for these short distances. But the movement of any American president it's awesome.
It's a huge amount of hardware, isn't it? And as you say, these 2 helicopters are in the back of this, I think it's a C-1 transporter plane. Normally the Cadillacs go as well. And then it's the people that fly with them as well. It's like he travels like any American president since the Second World War has travelled like a kind of latter-day, modern-day emperor.
What kind of numbers are we talking about in terms of the size of the entourage?
I spoke to somebody yesterday who's sort of involved in the logistics side of it, and he said he thought around 500 people will be travelling with the president. Obviously, not all on board Air Force One, but and amongst that, you've got the press pool, you've got this very large business delegation as well, and that gives a sense of what's going on behind the scenes. All those people are there for a reason. These things are planned for months in advance, at least 6 months, and everybody who's invited will have a role, a purpose, a mission that the White House wants them to fulfil, but also that they'll be looking to fulfil for their own personal purposes and business purposes. So, while we're seeing these pictures behind the scenes, there are all these relations being nurtured and cultivated. For some, the first time they'll have met each other, Marco Rubio and Yvette Cooper, possibly Britain's new Foreign Secretary. So there's a huge amount of networking going on in the background. It is like a sort of modern-day imperial retinue travelling around the world.
Just looking at the Prince of Wales, Prince William, with the president there. The last time they met, I think, was in Paris, the reopening of Notre Dame Cathedral. And back then, Trump, true to form, he said that Prince William looked really nice, very handsome, and said some people look better in person. I think implying that the prince's looks exceeded his expectations. So I think
that you call that a backhanded compliment.
I don't know. But that meeting in Paris was engineered by the British government using the royals to further the diplomatic relationship, and that's what this is all about as well. This idea that I guess everything that isn't American leadership is worse, and that Britain needs to be close to America, and so they are using the royal family, using this state visit to further the diplomacy. Let's be honest, what is a very difficult time. I mean, there's no political alignment between Keir Starmer and President Trump, between those two administrations. There's none. But there's a recognition that with this president, you have to stay as close as you possibly can. And, I talk, and I'm sure you do as well, Dom, to diplomats from other countries who are up front. They say, look, you guys have played it very well with the whole trade relationship. You've done better than we've managed to. Of course, Britain's not part of the European Union, which gives us this sort of freedom to be able to do that. But they're envious of this sort of thing. They're envious of Britain's ability to be able to lay all this on. And Britain will hope, the government will hope, it will pay dividends down the line.
Dominic, I was speaking to one of the organisers of the protests against Trump's visit on my programme last night on Sky News, and he very much had the view that, the UK yet again is bending over backwards to the United States. At this point in time, given what's going on in the world with Ukraine, the Middle East, the United States, encroachment on a conversation about freedom of speech in this country, so many different topics, now should be the time for the UK to stand up to America. And, their extreme example was not giving him a state visit, not affording him that. But, not having those conversations, I think the counter-argument is more harmful to the UK. In terms of how this is being viewed in the world, are the UK being seen as a soft touch by offering this so readily? Before the president was even out the starting blocks, really.
I mean, absolutely, whether it's outside of Britain or not, or within, I think, this is a very live debate that has vexed minds at the highest levels of government, and we've seen how Sir Keir Starmer has come down on that debate. But on the one hand, you have those saying, we would be mad not to do this. This is a president who loves royalty. He loves Britain. He's an Anglophile. For him, this kind of stuff is catnip.
Let's play our best hand,
If you've got that kind of asset, if you've got that kind of card you can play, you'd be mad not to play it. Others would say, well, Sir Keir Starmer played it too early. I've spoken to, prominent diplomatic veterans who say this should have happened later. It's something that could have been dangled for Donald Trump to play towards, and then he could have been rewarded for the right kind of preferential treatment giving to Britain. Other critics say it's just demeaning to have him a second time round. This is a man who You know, he's accused by a number of women of sexual misconduct. He's someone who's talked about grabbing women by the genitals. He's someone who has talked about Jeffrey Epstein, the infamous paedophile, as being a terrific guy, a great fun to be with. And the Epstein furore has really raised a stink. It's hard to think of a state visit that's had such an unsavoury prelude to it, and that scandal obviously had rocket boosters put on it by the Mandelson affair as well. So all of that, you know, critics are saying this is not the right time and he's not the right president to give a second state visit to. But those on the other side are saying, well, it's something that we had to do, and we'll see. We'll see what side of the argument wins, and whether this was a gamble that eventually backfires or whether it pays off. And I think ultimately we probably won't know for a few years.
Yeah.
You know, if in 3.5 years' time Keir Starmer's on his last legs and Donald Trump decides to give Nigel Farage the support he needs to push him into Downing Street, then you know, this will have proven to have been a rather naive gamble. If, on the other hand, we get preferential treatment in trade deals, you know, it may have paid off. But I think one thing we have to say with this president is he's unpredictable. He's somebody who goes back on his word. He pulls American signatures out of international treaties, the Paris Climate Change Agreement, the nuclear deal with Iran. You know, he's ripped up deals that he's himself invented and created with Mexico and Canada. So whatever he says tomorrow, can his word really be held to the same account that previous presidents can be as well? So, you know, it's something that's, I think we'll know whether it's all worthwhile in some time to come.
Yeah, Mark, your thoughts on that? Because, you know, you were there when Sir Keir Starmer visited the White House and handed over that official invitation from the King for this state visit, and it was seen as very early on to be handing that out. And if you think of what has happened between then and now in terms of the backdrop, you know, Ukraine, the war, you know, various other things, what's been the journey to get from there to here in terms of the backdrop?
Well, it was the trump card up front, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Right at the beginning. And Dom's right. There were some very uneasy minds at the British government's decision to do that so soon. But I can tell you that I had conversations with top people at the British Embassy in Washington just prior to that to that reveal that Keir Starmer, when he pulled the letter from the King out of his pocket. It was quite a last-minute decision to actually play that card at that point. As Dom said,
did President Trump know it was going to happen? I always wondered about that.
I don't know. I think he did that day. But in the days and the weeks beforehand, there was a live discussion in the UK about whether or not it was worth playing the card at that point, or, as Dom said, waiting a bit and using it down the line. And in the end, the diplomats in Washington won out. They were the ones that saying, do it now, and Prime Minister Starmer did. But it was kind of, it felt a bit uncomfortable. It felt sycophantic. You know, there was the hand on the shoulder of the president, dear Donald, all of that. But it's a gamble that I think we'll see whether it pays off. The point that Dom made, he brought up Nigel Farage, it's an interesting kind of observation that I've been talking to quite a lot of the pro-Trump people who are down here, British people, some Americans, Brits as well, wearing the Make America Great Again baseball cap. I asked them what their politics is. They are all aligned to Nigel Farage. They think Nigel Farage is the future. They think reform is the future. Some are further to the right of Farage. Tommy Robinson's name has been brought up a few times. They were all the people I spoke to were at the march, the Unite the Kingdom march at the weekend. So that's a kind of weird, awkward dynamic for Keir Starmer, because his biggest threat politically in the UK is Nigel Farage at the moment, if the polls are right. It is reform. And yet reform is much, much more closely aligned politically to Donald Trump. All the same touch-point issues like immigration that has been such a massive, massive challenge in the US. And on the southern border, Donald Trump has got a grip of it with his own methods that are controversial. And here in the UK, the people who are down here supporting him, aligned to Farage, they think he's great.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of the discussion in the build-up to today has been, you know, it's not about Donald Trump, it's about Sir Keir Starmer. The relationship between the UK and the US will continue, whoever is, in charge of the politics of those countries. But Nigel Farage, we know, has a relationship with Donald Trump. Donald Trump, in turn, has said that Sir Keir Starmer's a great guy. He really likes him. And Nigel Farage not really been part of the conversation in the build-up, essentially, to this state visit in terms of, is Donald Trump going to make any time for him when he's in the United Kingdom? I've not heard words to that effect, where you think that would be part of the conversation.
Yeah, I very much doubt that they will meet.
They've kept the schedule tight for him.
It's too short a schedule, isn't it?
Yeah, I just don't think that would happen.
Yeah.
What I do think is probable, is that people within Donald Trump's administration who are also here, they may well meet their political allies on this side of the Atlantic. I think that's perfectly possible, because remember, this is about much more than just the principles. Alongside the president in there is Susie Wiles, his chief of staff, the first woman to hold that position. Massively powerful. She's been with him for many years. She's a Floridian. And she's kind of driving the White House policy. She's there. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, effectively America's Foreign Secretary, also National Security Advisor. He's there. Stephen Miller, the Deputy Chief of Staff to Donald Trump, a hugely controversial man, a man who constantly seems to be extremely angry. His focus is immigration. He's been driving the immigration policy. We've seen what that looks like in America, and that's kind of an important side point, an important backdrop to all of this. What is happening in America, you know, the National Guard are on the streets of democratic cities. That's kind of the sort of the optics. But behind that, there are law enforcement officials pulling people off the streets who they believe to be illegal in America. There is accusations of racial profiling. This sort of thing happening in America is astonishing, and I think that's certainly something to remember as we see the pomp here.
And all of that's sort of very much at odds with Keir Starmer's political viewpoint, of course. You know.
Yeah, totally.
You know, an administration that's pulling people off the streets, arresting people for what they say, masked men on the streets of, you know, American cities, just arresting people without any apparent due process. You know, for a human rights lawyer, that's hard to watch. And you know, he's not the only one who will, to some extent, be holding his nose throughout these. This 3-day visit, but doing so lying back, thinking of Britain's interests, I think, and believing they're doing all this for a better cause. Just to go back to Nigel Farage, I don't think he's going to begrudge the fact that the president's come here and not seen him. He has a lot of face time with him. But I think it's an important point to make, Mark, saying that it's not just people here who are kindred spirits with President Trump who will see Keir Starmer as a kind of soft, liberal socialist that for them is their kind of political anathema. Most of the MAGA base back in America see Keir Starmer as kind of the worst of that European liberal socialism, and therefore I think the fear for the Starmer government is once the president's back in America, they then start pulling him away from the British government and back towards his more kindred spirits, people like Nigel Farage.
But that's exactly why this is happening, because clearly Keir Starmer, he recognises what Dom has just said, and he knows that Donald Trump is fickle and could end up aligning himself with the sort of MAGA base view that Keir Starmer is a sort of wokey liberal, and so they're leaning into him and trying to draw him in with all the sort of stuff that we're seeing.
Can a cooking oil reduce cholesterol? Yes, rice bran oil can. It is rich in gamma-oryzanol that reduces cholesterol. Alpha-1 in Asia and Golden Terra, Smart Balance oil in Africa help reduce cholesterol. Heart Healthy Oil, the smart choice.
It was the British ambassador's view of why all this is so important. And I think, Mandelson may have gone, but the view is clearly still that of the British government. And in this speech, he said, we can disagree on issues, and we do, but we cannot be fair weather friends, not when we want to be close partners in good times and an influential voice in difficult times. This has always relied on strategic depth, not just a personal interaction. So they're trying to further the personal interaction here between the British government, between Starmer and Trump, in order to deepen that strategic alliance.
It's that kind of, we're in a marriage together, for all its faults, for all the moments where we bicker and disagree with each other. We're in it together, and it's better for us to stay in the marriage. And that's the kind of sense that has really kept the special relationship a real and live
that
relationship.
Analogy pretty much summing up politics and diplomacy, right? You've got to get along with the people that personally you might not even like, let alone agree with.
But it's a relationship that is tested now, I think, more than it ever has been with this president, and that's one reason why this is happening, to try and to paper over the cracks in that transatlantic relationship, which are widening and have been widening since February, as much red carpet, gold brocade and sort of brass helmets that you can muster.
I was going to say, they've certainly gilded it, haven't they? They've certainly covered it in a bit of gold leaf today. Mark Stone, our US correspondent, our Foreign Affairs correspondent Dominic Waghorn, their thoughts on what is unfolding in this state visit, this unprecedented second state visit for US President Donald Trump. These are the scenes, the ceremonial scenes we had a little earlier here in Windsor. The King, the Queen and the Prince and Princess of Wales welcoming Donald Trump and the First Lady here to the UK. This is as Marine One landed in the grounds of Windsor Castle at around midday today. The American lady and the First Lady treated to a personal, family-centred greeting outside Windsor Castle, outside Victoria House, which is a property nestled in the Royal Kitchen Gardens at Frogmore here on the Windsor estate. The Trumps arriving from central London. They had been staying at the Ambassador's residence in Regent's Park. They arrived on board Marine One, the presidential helicopter. Here it is landing on the lawn of the walled garden a little earlier, timing slightly behind schedule. Unsure whether that was to do with the weather. Pretty rainy, drizzly and misty in central London, and certainly windy here in Windsor. The helicopter left at 12:16, well behind the planned time of 11:55 a.m. Well, they are now inside Windsor Castle, the President and the First Lady being settled into their accommodation, no doubt being given a tour of that, and they'll soon be having lunch. I'm joined now by our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills, as well as our royal commentator, whose voice you've been hearing over the ceremonial proceedings today, Alistair Bruce. Mark Stone, our US correspondent, said as he was walking here to our live point, everybody had Sky News on their mobile device, and your voice was booming out around the streets of Windsor. So it was nice to see everybody watching wherever they are today, because it was a real spectacle, a real treat. Whatever you think of President Trump and his visit, this is what the UK does best. Alistair, your thoughts on how it all went? As I said, to the untrained eye, looked like it went really well.
Well, apart from a few tetchy horses, no, I think it was fine. But, you know, with the weather as it is and with helicopters coming in and putting helicopters near horses, I think it went remarkably well. And it seemed like a sort of trip through the country as they made their way. We're used to seeing royal processions surrounded by the public, up the Mall, people either cheering or doing whatever they want. But it was very odd to see them travelling through what felt like country lanes. And yet at the same time, the excellence of the armed forces was delivered. And I think for the president, it can't possibly have been more of what he wanted to experience than it was. I mean, it particularly because where he was standing, looking at the great round tower of Windsor and seeing all that ceremonial in front of him, for him, and perhaps I think through all of this, there's the story of his mother, who was so fascinated by all of this as a child, and who cut out every picture she could find in the newspapers and magazines of a young Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret Rose. The idea that he was connected, now tomorrow's newspapers will all be about him, with all that same story and what must appear to be like some fairy tale, and yet it is so embedded in history, so much a part of the story of this land, that he has just experienced it. And I expect he's quite heady on it.
Yeah, that's the kind of effect the UK government want from this visit, isn't it, Rhiannon? And the senior royals out in force, the King joined by the Queen, because we found out shortly before the President arrived here in Windsor that the Queen is going to be present for the entirety of the state visit today, because she hadn't been very well.
That's right. Yesterday we heard that she had acute sinusitis, so she didn't go to the Duchess of Kent's funeral, making sure that she was there today and able to attend all of the events that are planned. I have just had the most spectacular view. I was standing in the quadrangle, right next to the Sovereign's entrance, and I've literally had the US President, the First Lady and all those members of the royal family walk straight past me. I had a completely unobstructed view, and I think whatever you think about this state visit, whether you think it should happen or not, this is UK PLC at its best. It is really showing off the United Kingdom at its finest. The ceremonial, I obviously had a very close-up view. Alistair was expertly commentating over the big picture. But just being there within the quadrangle, it was just the most incredible display. And Donald Trump, I could see up close his face. He just has the utmost respect and admiration for the royal family as a family, but also the monarchy as an institution, but also this military ceremonial. And in the run-up to this, we were told that this was going to be the largest ceremonial display that we've seen in living memory for a state visit. And if you're going to give it to somebody, you might as well give it to this man, who literally loves this stuff, cannot get enough of it. But what was also fascinating was watching the interaction between President Trump and the King. Of course, President Trump, as he was getting onto the plane yesterday, said, he's my friend, he's a great gentleman. The two men just seemed to be constantly chatting. And I think it was also wonderful to see President Trump. He was effusive in his thanks to the soldiers who were taking part as well. You could see him stopping and saying, thank you, thank you.
There was a moment where he had to be moved along by the King.
and I just think he has just thoroughly enjoyed just the start. Alistair has a lot more commentating to do this afternoon because there's going to be a lot more of this as the day goes on.
What I'd like to add, and you will have experienced this, Rhiannon, for the President to be in that quadrangle with all that ceremonial taking place, it's the sound.
Yeah.
It's the sound of the guns coming past, of the cavalry going past, of the musicians and of the soldiers and the words of command. And if it's all about you, and you know that in the evolution of a nation that has over 1,000 years of history in its monarchy, so easily and readily reachable, and yet today it's about him, that must have had an effect on him, I think. Did you feel the sound?
Yeah, and I think it's because you are there surrounded by the walls of the castle, and it just has a different feel to this display at Buckingham Palace. We know that the royal family love Windsor Castle. We know that they like to spend time here privately, and I think, as we saw for President Macron's state visit as well, it does add that kind of personal touch amidst all of the grandeur and the display. It really has felt, and this is the important part of state visits, it's about family to family as much as it is about state to state, and that is why today is so important. Of course, the politics and the backdrop and the controversy, you can't completely escape that. But today is all about making sure that the President just feels as welcome as possible and will leave this country just feeling that he has been welcomed and respected in the most incredible way.
And interesting to see the First Lady in conversation with the Princess of Wales. I mean, of course, all eyes will be on the King and the President and their interaction, but of course the First Lady, the Princess of Wales, the Queen, having conversations as well. And it's that kind of diplomacy as well that really plays into it. I was always struck by the story of the Zelenskys taking a letter to the First Lady in terms of, that wasn't talked about a lot, but that was seen as some really soft diplomacy away from, the men taking centre stage, the leaders, and that all plays a part today.
The whole family know.
I'd love to know what they're talking about, basically, is what I'm saying.
The whole family know that they have their part to play. They are the United Kingdom's diplomats in chief, really. And also, don't forget, these pictures will be beamed right around the world. And also, the White House will no doubt be thinking of, OK, what are the pictures that are going to play particularly well for an American audience?
That one there, the touch of the King
absolutely.
On the small of the President's back.
In America, they can't get enough of the Prince and Princess of Wales. Tomorrow, we're going to see more of the Princess of Wales spending time with the First Lady, Melania Trump. I know all of our eyes will be on the politics and on checkers. I can guarantee that the internet will go wild for those pictures. Two very glamorous ladies meeting some scouts tomorrow. But today is all about this kind of amazing military pageantry, and it felt like very special to be in there.
And we do know that the President and the First Lady are settling in to Windsor Castle because, of course, they'll be spending the night there. And then they're going to have lunch. Rhiannon, you normally come to me with news of the menu. Have we had that yet?
Not yet. No. So we should hopefully get news of what they've had for lunch. Also, the different items that they'll be looking at from the Royal Collection Trust. So the Royal Collection kind of have a good old rummage through the archive and find kind of the best bits that they can use to impress the visiting head of state. So, for example, we know that, of course, Donald Trump loves his military history, loves Winston Churchill, so we might see some of that ticked off. And then what's interesting about this state visit is that the President and First Lady they're literally spending the whole afternoon here at Windsor Castle. It really does feel like the royal family are playing host. So as well as looking at the royal collection, they're then going to go to St George's Chapel for a special tour, a performance from a choir. They'll pay their respects to Queen Elizabeth II. And then this is where Alistair again steps up, beating the retreat, happening this afternoon. And again, this is why we're being told there is more military pageantry around this state visit than any other. Alistair knows all the details about beating retreats. I'll leave that one to you.
I'm going to let Alistair rest his voice because, as you said, we are not done with the pomp.
With the all-new Tasty Tom 2-in-1 seasoning powder, busting with 8 grams of premium seasoning cubes, plus 3 grams of vibrant spices. This gives you 11 grams of 2-in-1 magic. No extra seasoning needed. Tasty Tom. Bust of flavours.
Trump and his wife Melania here to the UK a couple of hours ago in the grounds of Windsor Castle. The US President and First Lady being treated to a royal greeting on the private estate. Well, let's go live to Sir Simon Fraser, former Permanent Under-Secretary of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office from 2010 until 2015. He is also the founder of Flint Global, a geopolitical advisory company. Thank you so much for your time here on Sky News this afternoon. You will have been following the scenes we've been watching unfolding in the grounds of the castle behind us. We've sort of coined a phrase here today in terms of pomp and pageantry with purpose. What do you understand about what the UK wants from these couple of days?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The pomp and circumstance is part of a very important part of the state visit, and obviously something that President Trump values, as we know. But it's part of a broader strategy, which is the British government's attempt to engage with President Trump and the US administration and make sure that we have leverage in wider discussions about the issues that matter to us, whether it's trade, investment, or international political affairs such as Ukraine. So you have to see the whole thing in the round, and of course the substance will come tomorrow, but for today it's the focus on the glamour.
We've heard already this morning about deals done between US tech companies and the UK to the tune of billions of dollars. That deal signed tomorrow, but of course it was spoken about before Donald Trump arrived here in Windsor today. That will be a key takeaway, seen as a key win for the Prime Minister from this state visit already. But what do you think he will want the key outcome to be?
Well, as you say, given that, in public opinion there's some sort of concerns about the visit, I think it's important for the Prime Minister and the government that they demonstrate that there are positives coming out of it. And obviously, the investment decisions that have been made around what is being called the tech partnership between the UK and the US is a big thing, involving AI, nuclear cooperation, space, quantum computing. These are really important areas for the development of the UK economy, where the US is a very important partner. So that's important. And then on the other side of the ledger, there's a sort of bit more of a damage limitation agenda, which is around tariffs and trying to tie down the details, the final details of the trade agreement, and to the extent possible mitigate the consequences for the UK of the US tariffs that have been imposed. So those are very important things. And then beyond that, finally, the discussion about Ukraine, European security, America's commitment to Europe, and of course beyond that, the situation in the Middle East, relations with China, is a very big set of issues to be addressed in tomorrow's discussions.
It's all very nice and all very positive today. We knew that. We knew that would be the case with all the pageantry on display. We know Donald Trump is a big fan of the royal family and of the UK. This is being seen as the day to soften him up ahead of perhaps some difficult conversations tomorrow, whether that be about free speech, immigration, Ukraine, the Middle East, so many thorny issues. The UK will want to keep it positive, but those difficult conversations will be approaching. How will the Prime Minister take that on?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a very important point. I think the Prime Minister's done quite well in engaging President Trump. Obviously, they have very different political backgrounds and views, but they seem to have struck up an effective relationship in which the Prime Minister has engaged President Trump. But he has to, whilst he needs positive atmosphere, he has to avoid being seen to agree with President Trump on everything. So, as you say, on free speech, indeed on some of the things that are happening in America, on the issues around Ukraine, and of course on tariff issues which are affecting the prospects for the British economy, he's got to be absolutely clear in representing British interests and presenting British views in a clear and differentiated way. But it's got to be, for him, a constructive discussion. He needs a win out of this visit, given his own political circumstances at home. So it's a balancing act for him that he's got to achieve tomorrow.
Yeah, a balancing act on all of those fronts. And then, of course, the curveball that came just a week or so before Donald Trump came to the UK was the sacking of his ambassador, Lord Mandelson, to the US over his links to Jeffrey Epstein. Of course, the president himself has links to Jeffrey Epstein, and there is a news conference scheduled tomorrow after those bilateral talks. I would imagine quite a few of the questions are going to be about Jeffrey Epstein. How should that be navigated?
Well, there is going to be a press conference tomorrow, and clearly I would expect journalists to ask that question. After all, whatever may be said, we have free speech in this country and a free press. So those questions will be asked. I think that what's important for Keir Starmer is that he'll want to make sure that there is a focus on the positive content here. And you know, try to make sure that the momentum of the visit doesn't get lost in that way. Clearly, it's a tricky issue. I think that the Peter Mandelson sacking obviously is a significant piece of context, but I don't actually think it affects the conduct of this visit. He was very instrumental in the preparation of it, but you know, it's now being done, and I don't think it's going to affect the future.
Sir Simon Fraser, former Permanent Under-Secretary of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, really appreciate your time here on Sky News today, reflecting on this unprecedented second state visit by President Trump to the UK. It's officially underway. These are the scenes earlier on. The President, First Lady, King and Queen now inside Windsor Castle, being shown around, no doubt, settled in before a spot of lunch. I'm making it sound much more casual than it probably is. Our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills is here. She's just put her coffee down and her jelly sweets. That's our lunch here today outside Windsor Castle. Yeah, we're not having tea with the King. No. Talk to me about what's going to be happening now, because it's all the stuff that goes on in private, away from the cameras, that's just as important.
Yeah, and you say probably more formal, but actually I think it's what they're trying to impress on him today is that personal touch. And I think we saw that straight away when you had the Prince and Princess of Wales meeting him off Marine One, and then guiding the president towards father and kind of saying, here you go, Dad, you can take over now when it comes to the hosting responsibilities. I just think of all of the people for us to lay on what is described as the largest military ceremonial in living memory. Donald Trump is the man to have it, whether you agree with this state visit or not. He has a huge amount of respect for this kind of spectacle. And what is interesting, of course, is we've sort of been here before, because 2019, what can we do to make this one bigger, better, more impressive? And that is why you've kind of got all these little touches. So we're going to see a flypast later from US and UK aircraft. This was the largest guard of honour that we've ever seen for a state visit. And also, what's interesting is it's those touches of saying, here you go, Mr. President, this is why our joint relationship really matters. So a US military band is going to be involved in the ceremonial this afternoon. And while we look at the spectacle of it all and admire kind of the amount of rehearsal that's gone into all of this, actually it's what it stands for. And speaking to those in diplomatic circles, they said this stuff is so important when it comes to the US president, and they made sure that they did a lot of this for 2019, 2018 when he came over, because what they want to show him is how important our defence ties are. Sometimes as a president he can think about the mighty American armed forces. This is all about showing how important those ties are between our military here and the other side of the Atlantic.
A lot of this happening out of view, you know, as the day's gone on, the crowds have grown in Windsor, you know, people coming to perhaps take a look, protesters, but of course they can't see anything. It's a ring of steel around Windsor for this visit, of course, not just because of what's been going on in the United States in terms of targeting politicians and those with political views, but just in terms of keeping it all positive for the president, keeping the protests away from him, creating this illusion of, you know, welcome and comfort.
And I've found that when I was inside the castle grounds watching this ceremony unfold. You didn't see hordes of members of the Secret Service or police. It felt so calm and relaxed in there, and literally felt like, yeah, two heads of state having a lovely conversation and being able to just walk and relax and relax in each other's company. And I think that is partly why they've organised this state visit in this way, is because
I think we've
here
just got
at
the
Windsor
beast going behind us, Rhiannon.
Oh yeah, look.
These
got that amazing convoy.
Yeah, you can spot. Yeah, that's the beast just going into Windsor. This is the convoy. We were speculating with Mark Stone, our US correspondent, as to whether any of the president's vehicles have made it over from the United States. I think they have. We're not used to seeing these on the streets of the UK, but that just going into the grounds of Windsor Castle there, because it's a huge operation, not just here preparing for the visit, but a huge operation that gets the president from the UK to the United States, Rhiannon.
Yeah, but it's also interesting seeing those vehicles, because actually he's being flown everywhere. Yeah. So he was flown from Winfield House here to Windsor Castle. We're expecting him to be flown to Chequers tomorrow.
Prepare for every eventuality.
Well,
right?
exactly. That. Well, especially with the weather that we've got today. But yeah, today is all about making sure that the president feels like he is receiving the ultimate welcome. He just seemed to be, I don't know, in his element there inside Windsor Castle.
What can he and the King talk about? Because, I mean, I would imagine anyone watching us right now, if they had 5 minutes with Donald Trump, there is a huge range of...
The world needs moms. Providing tasty, nourishing family meals is all that matters. Because where there are moms, there is love. Golden Terra Oil. Pour pure love.
So I think it is fascinating to think about the relationship between the two men, because politically you might think they are absolutely poles apart, and you would be right, I suspect, on issues such as the climate crisis, Ukraine, Canada. And actually what's been fascinating over the last 6 months is how close the King has been brought to those difficult diplomatic discussions around, for example, he had President Zelensky over here. We saw him go over to Canada to open Parliament over there, touching slightly on the fact that Donald Trump, of course, has been talking about turning Canada into the 51st state. So, look, there's potentially a clash between the two men. Donald Trump, though, as he was getting on the plane yesterday, talked about them being friends, talked about how wonderful King Charles is. He seems to be one man that the president has not had a go at in public. He just seems to have the ultimate respect for him. We know that the two men back in 2019, they had tea at Clarence House, but they also apparently spent an hour having a very amicable conversation, I was told, about climate change. And I think Donald Trump looks at the King in a different way, maybe, from how he looks at other prime ministers, other heads of state. He has this almost very reverential approach to our monarchy. And you will probably see that, well, we won't see it, but that, I suspect, will be the air of those conversations. Whether or not Downing Street will have had a little word in the ear of his private secretary and said, well, it might be nice if you could allude to this. that we don't get told that, but it's fascinating.
It is indeed. OK, we're on the lunch break at the moment. Just quickly, what's coming up? Because we're not done in terms of the spectacle on display today.
No, obviously we won't see it outside here, but you will witness the Beating the Retreat ceremony, joined by UK and US military families. So again, touching that point about our defence ties. And then, of course, it's kind of the glitz and the glamour to end the day, which will be the state banquet and speeches from the King and President Trump, where we may, of course, get more of kind of alluding to why this really matters, maybe some of those deals that are being done. But ultimately, it's that personal touch that's really important today.
Plenty more to come. You can follow it all here on Sky News. Rhiannon, thank you. That's Rhiannon Mills, our royal correspondent. We're going to be live here in Windsor throughout the day. As Rhiannon said, plenty more to come, and you can follow it all with us. Donald Trump's second state visit here to the UK well underway. We'll have more coverage of this historic occasion after this short break.
I'm Cordelia Lynch, Sky's Asia correspondent, based here in Bangkok.
These slums, once gripped by fear and death.
There is far less bloodshed now, but it hasn't gone away.
Who's asking you to kill?
The police will give me the orders, and after I kill the target, I throw the gun away.
We try our best to uncover and unpick a fast-changing and deeply complex region.
These large waterways provided an excellent source of body disposal.
This is the Buriganga River, where victims who'd allegedly been shot dead were dumped.
Sheikh Hasina, how confident are you that she will stand trial?
She will stand trial, there's no doubt about that.
We're going to take you to the very heart of a criminal network, going undercover inside Southeast Asia's scam centres for the very first time.
We won't have any problems with police, it's okay.
Just seen Imran Khan leave, and as we understand it, he's just been shot in the leg.
They have decided that the only way they'll allow elections is if I'm inside jail or killed.
Sky News get the full story first.
Chinese vessels start encircling the boat we're on, blocking its path.
The Chinese are now deploying water cannons, firing it directly towards our boat. We've discovered doctors across Delhi dishing out pills like this, claiming they will provide a lifelong cure for homosexuality.
Rohingya people fleeing an escalating civil war.
The situation here in Cox's is desperate. An already insecure place does feel a lot more precarious.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So,
hello, good afternoon. Live from Windsor, Donald Trump's second state visit to the UK well underway this afternoon. The President and First Lady now inside Windsor Castle.
Introducing Smart Balance Rice Bran Oil is rich in gamma-oryzanol. Several studies suggest that gamma-oryzanol may contribute to the reduction of bad cholesterol. Golden Terra Smart Balance Oil. Good food, no worries.
We will bring that to you live here on Sky News. But not everyone is happy to see the President here in the UK. There have been protests both against Donald Trump's visit as well as people supporting his visit. These are the pictures we have, the latest pictures we have from the streets of Windsor this afternoon. As you can see, all fairly peaceful, but there are some numbers on the streets this afternoon. Well, joining me now live is Ailsa Anderson, former press secretary to the Queen from 2001 to 2013. Really good of you to join us on Sky News this afternoon. I'm sure you've been watching the scenes from Windsor Castle, wherever we find you this afternoon. We are well aware of what this historic occasion means to President Trump. How will the King be viewing this?
Well, the King, of course, is the UK's greatest ambassador. He's the ambassador of chief, I think, in the UK. And he's very well versed in carrying out state occasions of this kind. So I think he will handle it absolutely perfectly. He will be very steady, he'll be very gracious, and I think President will welcome. I mean, who wouldn't? You know, this is Britain at its best, the UK at its best. We put on this pomp, we put on the incredible military spectacular. You know, God willing, we're going to see the red arrows this afternoon. And I think, you know, we absolutely excel at things like this, and it will pave the way to the more important political discussions that the President will have with Sir Keir Starmer tomorrow.
Yeah, all of the soft diplomacy happening today, as you said, some difficult conversations, some more difficult conversations perhaps to be had at Chequers tomorrow. But in terms of how the royal family prepare for an occasion such as this, of course, you know, something particularly controversial about this one, given President Trump's stand.
Very warm. You know, the king is an expert at saying a lot, but actually saying nothing. So I don't think, you know, he'll play his cards very closely to his chest. But what he will do, as I said earlier, you know, he is the best diplomat this country has. And what he'll want to do is communicate the right message for what's going to be as good for the country as possible.
Ailsa Anderson, former press secretary to the Queen, really appreciate your time here on Sky News this afternoon as we cover this State visit from the US President to the UK. Our International Affairs Editor Dominic Waghorn is standing by. We've seen quite a lot already, Dominic. We were reflecting that a lot is happening in a very short window for President Trump here in the UK.
There's a huge amount going on, isn't there, on the surface, and what we're seeing is the full power of the full might of what the British state, as a constitutional monarchy, can muster, and it is truncated in terms of ties and therefore was not a viable venue. So being well choreographed and organised so that there is no risk of protest to cloud the pomp and circumstance.
Well, all seems to have gone according to plan, going very well. Alistair is our royal commentator saying that the pomp and
Queen, remember, last time round, nothing should go wrong. It's tomorrow where the jeopardy is, particularly the press conference. Is he going to, once he's sort of been able to bank the ceremony and the enjoyable bit of the visit, is he going to find it hard to resist having a poke at Sir Keir Starmer, who's not his political bedfellow at least? Is he going to say things that are going to raise eyebrows? And most importantly, is he going to give the kind of deals that the British government desperately wants, particularly on steel? Doesn't look like he is, actually. Or is he not going to? And is he going to go back saying, well, I've had a great time, but I've given nothing in return, which is what we often see with this transactional president?
Dominic, much more to come from you throughout the afternoon, but briefly, before we take a break, foreign affairs, your remit in terms of foreign policy, do you think we'll see anything significant from this visit?
I think that what the government wants to do, and Yvette Cooper, the new Foreign Secretary, wants to do, is to really look the American president in the eye and say what is going on with Vladimir Putin in Ukraine, to get the measure of where he's going on with this, because he's going in this cycle of warning the Russians, threatening them with sanctions, and then going back to talking to Putin and doing nothing about it. And I think, these are the moments, the time where you can reason with him as a person and get a sense exactly as to what his thinking is, and then you can try and tailor your foreign policy in the future to deal with that.
OK, Dominic, thank you. As I said, much more from Dominic Waghorn and the rest of our Sky News team throughout the afternoon here live from Windsor. You're watching Sky News' continued coverage of this historic second state visit by the US President here to the UK. He is inside the castle, the pomp and pageantry beginning earlier on today. He is now inside having lunch with the King, Queen, the Prince and Princess of Wales and other members of his party. We will have much more throughout the afternoon here on Sky News. Stay with us.
More nutritious meals, more veggies.
The national anthem played as the carriages drew up towards the castle. To the sound of the American national anthem, President Trump once again joined the King and Queen on stage. Then, at the invitation of King Charles, President Trump was offered the opportunity to inspect the Guard of Honour. To the sound of bagpipes, the welcoming ceremony drew to a close. President Trump and the King then headed inside Windsor Castle ahead of a lunch together, which is being held right now in the State Dining Room. Later, the President and First Lady will visit St George's Chapel to lay a wreath on the tomb of late Queen Elizabeth II. Then there will be a fly-past and, of course, the state banquet tonight. Well, it is a busy day, plenty more to come. Our international affairs editor Dominic Waghorn is following events with me from outside Windsor Castle. We're not allowed in there, Dominic, not for the likes of us. But in terms of what's been happening today, what's caught your eye?
Yeah, we can only peer in, can't we, and guess at what's going on in there and enjoy the spectacle. But, you know, what we're seeing on the surface is the kind of swan, if you like. It's a sort of incredibly serene and well-produced kind of military spectacle that the palace and Windsor Castle and the government have laid on. But behind the surface and below the surface, if you like to carry on with the swan analogy, there's a huge amount of paddling going on because there's so many people who have come with Donald Trump, from diplomats to business leaders to journalists. And those who are allowed in, they are working that, making the most of that networking opportunity as much as they can, as always happens. You know, I think, you know, for viewers looking in, you see the spectacle, you see the president meeting whoever's hosting him, but you don't see the hundreds of other people travelling with him, as we were saying earlier. An American president, really since the Second World War, has travelled like a kind of emperor with this retinue of people, huge amounts of, you know, 2 helicopters, a massive transport plane, often the Cadillac 1 and 2, and whatever decoys go with them, and then all these people as well. So that is going on behind the scenes, preparing for this visit tomorrow. This deal's being done. Whether we're going to hear about any more preferential treatment that Donald Trump might be giving Britain in the wake of this, and that's part of the gamble. This is a gamble, giving Donald Trump the only second state visit that any elected leader has ever been given, despite all the qualms and reservations, especially in terms of trading terms and giving us a preferential trading deal. The deal that the UK and the US have done so far better than Europe got, but it's still giving us tariffs that are worse than they were before, and so much of the devil is in the detail. It hasn't really been fleshed out enough, and I think this is an opportunity to kind of try and nail down this rather mercurial president and say to him exactly what else you're going to give us as part of our special relationship. Yeah, today's seen as the style, tomorrow the substance, but the optics from today are perhaps just as important as what happens tomorrow. These images beamed around the world, and this is a controversial visit for so many reasons, Dominic. How will this be viewed around the world, these scenes? I think with envy by our allies, because, you know, we have seen any number of world leaders traipsing through the Oval Office and trying to get preferential treatment from the American president, who is transactional, who believes that any deal must have one winner and one loser. And, you know, he's opened that kind of negotiation with so many countries with swinging tariffs that will come down if he likes what those countries then do next. And he has given the UK, it seems, better trading terms, but they want to get more from them. But, you know, the critics of this trip say it's demeaning for King Charles here and the other members of the royal family. And it is demeaning because of who Donald Trump is, because of his record with women, his involvement with Jeffrey Epstein. But also, I think the criticism on a sort of broader geopolitical level, and the reservation is this is a president who is unpredictable. And whatever he says tomorrow in terms of commitments he might give the UK, he is somebody who goes back on his word. He changes his mind as often as his shoes, it's said. And so, you know, he may give commitments tomorrow that he may simply renege on later. You know, he's ripped up America's signature on international deals like the Paris climate change deal and the Iranian nuclear deal. That just shouldn't happen. And therefore, he's not somebody who can be held to, and they have to milk this relationship for all they can, and this is the best way of doing this, deploying the best of British to try and flatter a president who likes to have his ego stroked.
Yeah, just where we are now, outside Windsor Castle, I should just point out that the gates in that archway behind us have been closed. They were open, but the chapel, St George's Chapel, just behind those gates, and we know that after lunch the President is going to be taken to the chapel to be given a tour, and he will also lay a wreath at the tomb of Queen Elizabeth II, and obviously that vantage point closed. That is private, behind closed doors, so they've shut those gates in accordance with that. But just in terms of today ahead of tomorrow, this is seen as the flattery bit, sort of, you know, buttering the president up against before some difficult conversations tomorrow. And you talk about him changing his mind as much as he changes his shoes. He's been described as fickle, you know, taking the opinion of the person he last spoke to. He loves the royal family, that's why this has been laid on today, but just how long-lasting will the effect be of all this glitz and glamour?
I think that's the question. And if you talk to Canada, you talk to Mexico, they thought they had trade deals with Donald Trump from last time round that, you know, would secure them preferential arrangements with Trump's America, and he just turned around and basically reneged on them. I mean, Joseph Stiglitz, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, was on Sky a few weeks ago saying that this deal that Keir Starmer has signed or begun the process of sealing with Donald Trump isn't worth the paper it's written on, because he says, you know, that's what Donald Trump does. He goes back on these deals, and so he's one of the kind of critics of that. And, you know, Keir Starmer's got to prove those critics and those sceptics wrong. But I guess ultimately that we'll really know whether this has paid off in a few years' time, because we'll see how Donald Trump changes his attitude to the British government over time. And the other point I think, Essay, is that, you know, if you talk to someone like Malcolm Turnbull, the Australian Prime Minister, it's not just that he goes back on his word, it's the fact that he says he's a bully. I mean, he's undoubtedly uses coercive diplomacy. You know, we saw the way he treated President Zelensky in the Oval Office, ganging up on him with J.D. Vance, his vice president. And what Turnbull says is that if you suck up to a bully, he'll only come back for more. So that's the other fear, is that he likes what he gets here. He sees Britain as a bit of a soft touch. He doesn't give us what we want, but he expects to come back for more concessions on his terms and not ours. So that's another part of the gamble that the Prime Minister's got to prove actually doesn't turn out to be right. He's got a lot to prove, I think, and we'll see the beginnings of whether this is working tomorrow, but with all the reservations that we've been saying about this unpredictable president who doesn't always stick to his word.
And all of this discussion, all of those points you raising, quite awkward points, but they will probably be put to the President and the Prime Minister tomorrow at the news conference, because, of course, today is all about the softening up. Tomorrow is the hard conversations at Chequers, the Prime Minister's country residence, and the bilateral talks, so much to be discussed. And then there will be that news conference in front of people like yourself asking these difficult questions about a whole range of topics. What do you think we'll get there? Because so much of it is going to make it awkward and very tense.
Yeah, and I think that's the moment of greatest jeopardy for Sir Keir Starmer. He knows that Donald Trump, you know, often doesn't know what he's going to say next, and he will shoot his mouth off, and he might be tempted to say something that's going to be uncomfortable for the Prime Minister. It wouldn't be the first time that he's done something to embarrass his host. And I think, you know, they're going to try and control it as much. All the press conference is going to be scaled back. It's not going to be as many questions as was originally promised or certainly hinted at. And that wouldn't be surprising. You know, if you're organising this, and if today goes as well as it has so far, not a foot put wrong by the British military and by their guest, then you don't want things to unravel at the last stage. And to give Sir Keir Starmer something in return for what he's been given the day before. And I think, you know, already there's some disappointment about that. It seems that a It's not going to be forthcoming from this American president. That's been kind of, our expectations have been managed by Downing Street already on that.
Okay.
So are there going to be more disappointments? Are we going to have to rely on these AI and cyber jobs and investments that we've been told about already? Or are there going to be more rabbits pulled out of the hat? So I think we're just going to have to wait and see.
OK, there's a lot more to get through before we get to that, Dominic. Thank you very much, our Foreign Affairs Dominic Waghorn there. Already there was a warm welcome from the royals. You saw that play out on your screens just then. However, some people have been really happy about the president's visit this week. These are the latest pictures we have from around where we are at Windsor Castle. We have seen protests against the president's visit, but we have also seen support for Donald Trump as well. Protesters against the visit